The misinformation effort on the part of Russian trolls to help get Donald Trump elected was far greater than we had previously known. Two new reports prepared for the Senate Intelligence Committee examined millions of posts that Russia's Internet Research Agency posted online with the Russians pretending to be Americans. Some of the memes are quite something. This one, for instance, tells you to, quote, like for Jesus team, ignore for Satan team. Or even fake hotlines. They've set up actual hotlines posted online for people struggling with their sexuality or other issues, creating an opportunity, in the words of the report, to blackmail or manipulate these individuals in the future. But what stuck out most to me was the aggressive Russian effort to target African Americans specifically. They deployed memes like this, posted to a page called Black Matters, in an effort to suppress African American support for Hillary Clinton. And part of the reason that tactic jumped out at me is that it's a very strange tactic. It is not normally part of the campaign toolkit to take some demographic group and try to suppress them in your messaging. And it also happens to be the same tactic used by none other than the Trump campaign. Shortly before the election, a senior official told Bloomberg, quote, "We have three major voter suppression operations underway, targeting idealistic white liberals, young women, and African Americans." After he won the presidency, Trump even took a victory lap where he celebrated the suppression of black votes.
We did great with the African American community, so good. They didn't come out to vote for Hillary. They didn't come out. And that was the big. So thank you to the African American community.
Joining me now to discuss the voter suppression effort, Sherrilyn Ifill, President Director, Counsel, NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund. Sherrilyn, obviously voter suppression is a time-honored tool in American politics, going all the way back and from the Reconstruction era. But the tactic of selecting groups with a message to tell them not to turn out struck me as weird when the Trump campaign copped to it, and it's weird to see it show up in the Russian report. What do you think of it?
Well, last week, Chris, we filed a complaint in federal district court in Alabama challenging the way members of the city council are elected in Pleasant Grove, Alabama, where the black population is 46%, but no African American has ever been elected to serve on the city council. That's the kind of voting scheme that we are familiar with that is designed to keep African Americans from being able to elect representatives of their choice. We also sued Waller County during the midterm because of the disparities in early voting that they provided to students at Prairie View A&M. That's the kind of voter suppression tactics we're used to seeing. We all saw what happened in Georgia with absentee ballots, and we've seen some of the work around election fraud that has emerged in the last few weeks. So frankly, the targeting, particularly of African American communities, to try to keep African Americans from voting, whether by robocalls, by discriminatory voting schemes, or even by campaign tactics, is tried and true and not weird at all. It's also not weird that outside forces recognize that racism is a vulnerability in the United States that can be exploited. It used to be during the Cold War that American leadership, white American leadership, feared that the Soviet Union would benefit from images flashing across American screens of civil rights workers being beaten. And that was part of the reason for some of the support for civil rights gains within white leadership in this country. So it's also not surprising that that's a vulnerability. What's shocking and really intense in the two reports, the studies of the 2016 election, is the extent to which Russians targeted African American voters in particular with messages designed to provide misinformation, to manipulate and to divide. We knew some of this from Mueller's indictment of this same group in February. Paragraph 46 of his indictment lays it out in detail. We knew that Facebook and Instagram had been used, but we did not know the extent of it until these reports. And the extent of it is quite extraordinary. In fact, principally among all the groups targeted, African Americans received the most attention by these Russian troll farms. The understanding that African Americans should be targeted to try to keep them from voting for Democrats, but also recognizing the way in which racism and racial tropes could be used to stir up racial divides in the election. Yeah, very shocking. And very concerning. Yeah, there was the quote from the African Americans were single group targeted most heavily by the IRA, and it wasn't even a close margin. You had an interesting thread this morning, and obviously you've been doing work specifically on race and the franchise and access to voting for a very long time in a domestic
political context. And you had a thread this morning that was sort of about the kind of pinch of this, the bite of this in that context, and specifically why it matters to you. I think there are a lot of people who say, look, America's racial issues, the problems of white supremacy in America and disenfranchisement, Russia didn't make those. That's born and raised in the USA. And this is an attempt to scapegoat. Why does it matter to you that the Russians were using this particular tactic?
Because I just, this is exactly right. I just described how the kind of intense resources we have to bring to challenge voter suppression and voting discrimination at the local level, at the municipal level, at the state level. We had to sue President Trump for his Election Integrity Commission. So African Americans have to deal with the challenge of voter suppression that is, that comes at us from state and local governments, and since the Trump election, even from the federal government. Now what we're learning is that we have to face voter suppression efforts by foreign governments. And in this case, what is concerning and what we have to learn from the Mueller investigation is whether not only do we have to face that challenge from foreign governments using social media platforms, but whether or not social media platforms, Facebook and Instagram and others, are willing to be sufficiently vigilant to try and stop this effort, and whether there are domestic campaigns who, rather than, as the American government during the Cold War was concerned and responded to civil rights efforts in an effort to keep that influence from happening, whether there are domestic campaigns who align themselves with these efforts by Russia and Russian interests to try and suppress black votes. There were efforts here to keep black people from voting. If you look at the messages are trying to keep black voters from coming out to the polls. Yeah. And that's voter suppression. Those are messages of voter suppression, like robocalls saying, don't come out on Tuesday, come out on Wednesday. So the question now is, not only are these efforts happening and what are we going to do to stop them, but are there domestic political interests that would be willing to line up with foreign nationals and foreign interests to try and suppress the African-American vote? Sherrilyn Ifill, thank you so much for being with me tonight. Thank you, Chris.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.